The morning after Fernando Mendoza led Indiana to its first national championship, the transfer portal opened up, and within hours, 3 Power 4 programs were on the phone. But they weren't calling for Fernando. They wanted his brother, Alberto Mendoza. Alberto was a redshirt freshman and a backup quarterback worth over $2 million from programs that hadn't even looked at him coming out of high school. So how does one player winning a championship inflate the market value of an unproven backup by 10 times overnight? What happened in January of 2026 wasn't just a typical recruiting story, because it was actually a massive pricing event that changed the transfer portal forever. Stick around, because we're diving into how the Mendoza name became the most expensive brand in college football. To figure out why Alberto's name alone could move markets, you have to look at exactly what Fernando built during that 2025 season and what it was actually worth to the school. The production numbers tell part of the story, like his 2,980 passing yards and his 33 touchdown passes, which were the best in the country. He added 6 rushing scores, finished an undefeated regular season, and walked away with both the Heisman Trophy and a national title. On pure football terms, Fernando Mendoza delivered one of the most complete seasons we've seen from a quarterback in a decade. But the football stats aren't what changed the market prices, because the real story is in the financial data. Indiana originally brought Fernando in from Cal for $2 million in NIL money, which felt like a massive gamble for a program with only 9 winning seasons in the last 30 years. Before he arrived, Indiana football was basically a distressed asset with a loyal local fan base, but very little national relevance. That $2 million wasn't just a recruiting pitch, it was a venture capital bet on an undervalued player in an undervalued market, and the return was unlike anything a collective had ever seen. Indiana's playoff run brought in over $16 million for the Big Ten, and the program's total valuation shot up to $386 million. Donor money started pouring in, and the Hoosiers on the Rise collective saw their budget jump by 50% immediately after the championship. If you do the math, the return on that original $2 million investment was over 19,000%. Every collective board in the country saw that data and realized that spending big on one proven star, rather than spreading money across an entire recruiting class, could change a program's whole future. Indiana didn't just win a trophy, they proved a theory. The market doesn't just price the player, it prices the proof that the plan works. And that proof followed the Mendoza last name straight into the next deal. January 20th, 2026. The winter transfer portal officially opens for business, and Alberto Mendoza's name hits the database like a lightning bolt. By the time the sun went down on that first day, 3 different Power 4 programs had already burned up his phone line. But if you actually pull up his film, you see a massive question mark. Alberto was a redshirt freshman who spent his season taking a handful of snaps behind one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the college game. There is no full game tape to watch, no multi-game sample for scouts to pick apart, and absolutely no production history that would normally spark a bidding war. In any other year, a standard evaluation would value him between $250,000 and $500,000, which is the going rate for a backup with his limited resume. But that is not what happened, because the market decided to price the narrative instead of the film. Suddenly, the name Mendoza didn't just mean a freshman backup anymore. It stood for National Championship DNA. It meant this was a kid who spent every single day practicing against a Heisman winner, absorbing a pro-level offensive system, and growing up in a house where elite play was just the family baseline. That last name acted as a high-level credential that no amount of game snaps could ever provide. To understand how wild this actually was, you have to look at the 2 players who set the price for the quarterback position. When Cam Ward moved from Washington State to Miami for the 2024 season, he was a proven star with a mountain of stats, and he commanded over $4 million in NIL money. He went out and earned every cent of it by throwing for 4,200 yards and 38 touchdowns, leading Miami to the playoffs and becoming a top 5 NFL prospect. In that case, the film matched the price tag perfectly. Then you have Darian Mensah, who signed a massive $8 million 2-year deal at Duke as an established Power 4 starter. At the time the ink dried, that was the largest public NIL package in history, but Mensah had the starts and the track record to back it up. Alberto had none of those things, yet he was being discussed in that exact same tax bracket. This is the Mendoza premium in action. Before Fernando became a superstar, a backup with Alberto's profile would be lucky to see a $500,000 offer on a good day. After the Mendoza name took over the sport, similar players were seeing $1 million inquiries before they even stepped foot on a campus for a visit. The entire position repriced itself in real time, and it was all driven by one player's brand rubbing off on a family member who hadn't even played a meaningful down yet. In the old days, the film room was the start of the recruiting process, but after January 2026, the last name on the jersey started opening the doors instead. This brings us to Mendoza Premium Lesson number 2. Family brand equity is now a real taxable asset class. In this new era of college sports, a famous last name works just like a franchise tag in the NFL because it sets a high price floor before a coach even looks at the highlights. 3 different programs looked at the same limited tape and reached 3 totally different conclusions about what Alberto was worth. This is where the story gets really interesting, so let's look at the offers. You have to stop thinking about these as simple recruiting pitches. Georgia Tech, Duke, and Miami didn't just send Alberto a nice highlight reel and a friendly phone call from the head coach. Instead, every program turned in a professional investment thesis for the same player. And the differences between those plans explain why the market rewarded him the way it did. To break this down, we're using the CEO scorecard. We are grading each school from 1 to 10 on 4 specific metrics: collective spending power, media market exposure, QB development history, and playoff odds. Stick around to see how these numbers actually shake out. We have to start with Miami, because on paper, the Hurricanes should have won this battle before it even started. The Miami Collective was sitting on about $15 million for their roster, with total costs rumored to be over $24 million, giving them the biggest war chest of any school on this list. They had already built a quarterback pipeline that most teams would kill for, having brought in stars like Cam Ward, Carson Beck, and Darian Mensah. With a massive donor base and a national media market, the chance to lead a rebuilt Miami program to a title was a huge selling point. On pure spending power, Miami is an easy 9 out of 10, but here is where the plan started to fall apart. To Alberto's family, that quarterback carousel didn't look like a pipeline at all, but instead, it looked like a revolving door. Darian Mensah signed that $8 million deal, played 1 season, and was already back in the portal and caught up in a lawsuit by January. When you are deciding where to take your career next, a school that is on its 3rd quarterback in 3 years sends a very scary signal. It wasn't about the money, it was about the lack of stability. So Miami only gets a 5 for development. They were the highest spenders, but they were the slowest to close the deal. Duke came to the table with a completely different strategy. The Durham Devils Club Collective was projecting $14 million for the season, which is a massive amount of money for a private school with a smaller football footprint. Duke's academic prestige and their media ties in the Research Triangle gave them a unique edge that most schools can't match. When it comes to the donor profile and market exposure, Duke is a heavy hitter. The problem, once again, was the ghost of Darian Mensah. Duke didn't just lose their starter to the portal, they actually sued him to try and keep him. And that legal drama became the only thing people were talking about. Before Alberto's camp even sat down to talk to Duke, the first thing they saw was a program in a courtroom battle with the last guy they paid $8 million to. That narrative of instability ruined every other number in Duke's pitch. They liked Alberto early, but they couldn't close the deal because a program suing its own players is a program with major internal issues. Georgia Tech didn't have the $20 million checkbook or the Ivy League reputation, but what they did have was total clarity. Coach Brent Key has a stable staff, and in 2026, that is a massive competitive advantage when other schools are firing coordinators every 6 months. The Atlanta market offers huge exposure without the constant suffocating pressure you find in South Beach. When their previous quarterback left for Florida, Georgia Tech didn't just have an open spot on the roster. They had a desperate need, and desperation usually leads to fast decisions. Alberto hit the portal on January 20th, and Georgia Tech closed the deal in less than 24 hours. That kind of speed is more than just a detail. In a market where these windows are only open for a few days, the team that commits first is sending a message that their donors are ready and their coaches are on the same page. Georgia Tech didn't win because they had more money than Miami. They won because they moved faster than everyone else and offered a much cleaner story. The final grade for Georgia Tech is an A-. They had middle-of-the-pack money, but their execution was perfect. The roster need was real, and their stability was something the other 2 schools just couldn't offer. This leads to Mendoza Premium Lesson number 3. When the portal window is small, the speed of your commitment proves your donors are aligned. The team that signs the player first usually wins, not because they spent the most, but because they proved the support system was already waiting for him. Now that we know who won the Alberto sweepstakes, we have to ask the bigger question: what did this one deal do to the value of every other quarterback waiting in the portal? In the world of finance, there is a concept called price discovery, which is basically the moment a single sale reveals what an entire asset class is actually worth. You see it in real estate when one house sells for a crazy number and suddenly every neighbor thinks their place is worth the same. You see it in tech when one startup gets a massive funding round and every competitor instantly revalues themselves. On January 20th, 2026, this exact phenomenon hit the transfer portal. The second Alberto Mendoza's name popped up in the database. Before the Mendoza family stepped into the NIL economy, the market for a redshirt freshman backup quarterback was pretty easy to predict. Back in 2023, programs were looking at guys with that profile for somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. And even then, you needed great practice film and a real story about your potential to get paid. The film had to do the heavy lifting. But now the floor has shifted to over $1 million for any backup who even has a loose connection to a proven winner. And it doesn't matter if they've actually played a meaningful snap. This isn't just inflation we're seeing, but a total structural shift in how the entire quarterback position is valued. And the ripples from this are moving way beyond just the Mendoza family. Take a look at the lawsuit Duke filed against Darian Menza, because it tells you exactly where the market is headed. On the surface, it looks like a standard contract dispute, where a school is trying to hold a player to a signed deal. But when you pull back the curtain, the lawsuit reveals just how vulnerable these programs have become lately. Duke committed $8 million over 2 years to a starting quarterback, watched him walk into the portal anyway, and then had to go to court just to protect their investment. This isn't just a Duke problem, but it's what happens when the price of players goes up way faster than the contracts designed to protect the schools. Collectives built their agreements for a world where $1 million was the ceiling, not for a world where backups want starter money just because their brother won a Heisman. The Matt Barkley story is a perfect parallel here because it shows the massive risk these collectives are taking on right now. Barkley went back to USC as a projected top 10 NFL pick, but he got hurt. His play dropped off, and he ended up falling all the way to the 4th round. That single decision didn't just hurt his rookie deal. It wiped out the massive franchise player earnings that were supposed to follow for the next decade. Programs are facing that same kind of exposure today. When a collective pays premium prices for a quarterback who hasn't actually produced on the field, they are essentially betting top 10 money on a 4th round outcome. The Mendoza premium made that bet feel like a smart move at the time, but the high failure rate is eventually going to prove otherwise. Since the House settlement, the math behind these risks has become even more dangerous for athletic directors. Schools are now handing out about $20.5 million a year in direct revenue sharing to their athletes. At the biggest blue blood programs, the quarterbacks are taking up 20 to 30% of that entire pie, which means the quarterback room alone can eat up $6 million before you even count the collective money. The Mendoza premium isn't just some interesting NIL story anymore, but it's now a permanent line item in the school budget. That means if you overpay for the wrong quarterback, you are taking money directly away from every other athlete on campus who is fighting for that same pool of cash. Any collective that was still using 2024 pricing models when the portal opened in January of 2026 wasn't just behind the times. They were trying to navigate a market using a map that didn't even show the new mountains. Mendoza Premium Lesson #4. When the price of one player resets, the price for the whole room goes up with it. Collectives that didn't fix their valuation models after January 2026 were working with broken data, and using bad data in a tight window is the fastest way to pay a first-round price for a fourth-round result. The market has officially reset, and the big question now is who can actually afford to stay in the game, and who is going to get buried by the cost. The Power 4 programs with $15 million collective budgets and stable coaching staffs are the ones best equipped to survive this new reality. They have the resources to build these new price floors into their yearly budgets. They can handle the portal process without hitting the panic button, and they can survive a bust without the whole roster falling apart. For these giants, the Mendoza premium is really just an annoyance or the cost of doing business in a market they were already winning. But the group of 5 and mid-major schools don't have that kind of safety net. Before January of 2026, A smaller school with a decent budget could actually land a solid portal quarterback for maybe $500,000. That window is slammed shut now, when the starting price for a backup with a famous name is over $1 million, and the proven starters are asking for $3.5 million. The schools with $4 million total budgets aren't even in the room anymore. They are stuck on the outside looking in. The Mendoza premium didn't just make things harder for them, it pushed them out of the quarterback market entirely and turned them into a farm system for the schools that can actually pay the bill. Private equity firms have been watching all of this very closely, and their interest is anything but casual. Big players like Redbird Capital and Sixth Street have been hanging around athletic departments for years, just waiting for a reason to dump money into the system. When Indiana's value jumped to $386 million off the back of a single NIL investment, it gave those firms the proof they needed. It showed that spending big on one star player can actually move the needle on what a whole program is worth. Now, athletic departments with big fan bases and TV deals look like a distressed asset to a private equity analyst, which is just a fancy way of saying they are a bargain waiting for a spark. The Mendoza family provided the perfect case study for this, and now private equity is busy writing the pitch decks to take over the sport. This is where the math of the arms race starts to get really uncomfortable for everyone involved. Every collective board that saw Indiana turn a $2 million investment into a massive return is now asking the same question: who is our version of Fernando? That search alone is driving up prices for every position on the field, not just the quarterbacks. Whether it's an elite edge rusher or a star receiver, every position with a shortage of talent is getting more expensive because the logic is the same. Everyone thinks that spending all your money on one proven star is better than spreading it out across a whole recruiting class. The logic makes sense on paper, but the risk of failing is absolutely massive. The reality is that 35% of top 50 portal quarterbacks don't actually perform well at their new schools, and that's according to years of tracking data. That failure rate didn't go down just because the checks got bigger. What changed is how much it hurts when you're wrong. Back in 2023, a $400,000 mistake was painful but survivable. In 2026, a $2 million bust with no contract protections is the kind of mistake that gets a collective director fired and leaves a program broke for 2 years. The programs that make it through the next few years won't necessarily be the ones who found the next superstar. They'll be the ones who built smart pricing models that account for things like brand value and performance goals before the bidding war even started. Mendoza Premium Lesson #5. The schools that survive the next portal cycle won't be the ones with the biggest checkbooks. They'll be the ones that figured out what players were actually worth before the market moved, not after the price already went up. One family, 2 portal moves, and a college football economy that will never be the same. Fernando Mendoza did a lot more than just hand Indiana a trophy, because his move created a pricing event that rippled through every quarterback room and NIL budget in the country. That $2 million acquisition generated returns that completely rewrote what athletic directors think is possible from a single transfer in 2026. When his brother entered the portal, it proved that the brand halo follows the last name rather than the actual snap count on the field. The Mendoza Premium has become the new benchmark for the industry, where a proven winner mixed with a family narrative and championship DNA creates a valuation floor that traditional scouting can't touch. This reality isn't going anywhere, and the truth is that the family members of the next Heisman winner are already more valuable than they were a year ago. It doesn't even matter if those relatives have played a meaningful down of football yet. If you want a career in sports business, you need to build NIL models that look at brand adjacency instead of just production history. You should also structure performance tiers into every contract before the portal window opens. And remember that closing a deal in 24 hours isn't about luck, it's about being aligned. Subscribe to Revenue Racers for more financial breakdowns of the decisions happening behind the scoreboard, because the real game is always in the numbers.